In this class today, I would discuss the use of force in customary law. Use of force post 1945 when the UN was created. Rather, after the creation of United Nations. The right of self-defense, historically, it has been the fact of our life. It has existed. It has become an undeniable fact of human history. At the same time, the right of self-defense in customary law remains an open-ended right, not definable to the point of agreement. The words "nothing in the present UN Charter shall impair the inherent right of self-defense" are given different meanings that generates expensive controversy, that generates extensive controversy as to the extent of this right. Some group of writers states say that provision preserve the pre-existing rights of a state without express provisions. In customary law, it has been the focus of lively debates, research, and controversy about a possible expanded right of states to use force in circumstances that differs significantly from two accepted legal grounds: the authorization by the UNSC under Chapter 7 and self-defense under Article 51. I welcome you, my dear students, to this class. I am Professor Iqbal Rahman. I am teaching this course on United Nations and world peace. Peace without which we cannot live. Peace which we all want. Peace states want. Peace people wants. It is something which is very essential for all of us, for the development of us, for preserving security. Treaty law restricts and creates constraints on the possible use of force. The behavior of states has been to expand the interpretation of Article 51, which allows the use of force in self-defense. That led to several legal issues and ill-defined uses of force. The behavior of states actually causes the disagreement with regard what constitute self-defense according to Article 51. Treaty law provides that it is allowed only when the state is under attack. Customary law puts it differently. The behavior of a state with regard to this position furthers the controversy, the debate, which relates to the evolution of customary law and the treaty law. This serves as a political cover. I'm talking of the behavior of states. This serves as a political cover for many of them to justify their proactive military operations in other states in the name of legitimacy of self-defense. Owing to this, the debates can be charted out, can be categorized into two streams of interpretation of Article 51. One category could be described as the expansive approach, which is most open-ended and interprets the rule in the most flexible manner possible. This approach creates spaces for the justification of use of force by states under various possible circumstances. It does not limit the use of force in reference to Article 51 of the United Nations only. It widens the scope of self-defense under customary law. The other category is restrictive. The category of the treaty law. It prohibits the use of force for states in dealing with disputes with another states. This prohibition aims at settling the inter-states dispute by peaceful means in order to avoid wars. So the treaty law focuses more and more on peaceful settlements of dispute. Customary law, it considers it. It also provides a space for that the peaceful means for settlement of disputes must also be exploited, must also be used. They could be given priority, but as a matter of their right, they use violence. It says that the right of self-defense arises only if an armed attack occurs under Article 51 of the UN Charter. And the provision should be narrowly constructed. This is the restrictive approach dealing with the use of force. Dealing with the use of force in self-defense. The limits imposed on self-defense in Article 55 would be meaningless if wider customary law right to self-defense survives unfettered by these restrictions. So this becomes a issue. The first approach holds the view that the right to self-defense. The first approach means the expansive approach, not restrictive one. It says that right to self-defense is limited to the case of actual armed attack, aggression on the state, whereas the other stream expanded the extent of the right to self-defense to include anticipatory self-defense against the states and non-states actors, particularly after 9/11, 2001 terror attacks on United States of America. What is anticipatory self-defense under customary law? This is not part of the treaty law. This is required here that we should, in very brief, try to understand what is anticipatory self-defense. The term anticipatory self-defense describes any use of offensive force employed to counter, to defeat the threat of future armed attack. Attack, they might happen. Attacks not taken place. This umbrella term is divided into two forms of anticipatory self-defense, preventive self-defense, and preemptive self-defense, which are used interchangeably. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter recognizes the rights of the state as inherent right of self-defense. If an armed attack occurs, then only it could be used. Given the wording of the Article 51, the issue under consideration is whether and under what circumstances defending states possess a right of self-defense against future armed attacks that by definition have not yet taken place. This is a gray area which creates problems when the use of force is in discussion relating to the customary law and treaty law. States are rarely consistent in how they describe the right to use force in respect of future threats. This is not part of the treaty law. Treaty law has not actually thought of it when the treaty was created, when the UN was created. This kind of the anticipatory self-defense were not the subject of discussion, deliberation, when the draft of the United Nations Charter was in preparation. Labels such as anticipatory, preventive, or preemptive self-defense may be used variously to describe very different rights of actions. The notion of right of anticipatory self-defense by a state, even in the post-UN Charter era, is said to derive from the Caroline incident of 1837. It is said that anticipatory self-defense, use of force in anticipation, use of force as preemptive strike. American boat, which was known as Caroline, was destroyed by the British Canadian forces on assumption that it was supplying arms to the rebels in Canada against Britain, the then colonial power. The United States of America described the act as unprovoked act against a neutral state, against the territory of United States of America. The Britain justified the attack by claiming the right of self-defense against the threat emanating from the US territory. The United States government declared that the attack on the vessel constituted an attack against the American territory. The British government responded by claiming that right. Subsequent diplomatic engagements articulated the widely accepted standard for anticipatory self-defense incorporated into Webster Ashburton Treaty. From this correspondence, it was laid down that the need to act in anticipatory self-defense to be legitimate in customary law must rise to the level of necessity, instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation. What it says that the legitimate use of self-defense in anticipation must rise to the level of necessity, which should be instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation. The intensity of the use of force in self-defense must justify by its necessity, must be proportionate to the necessity and exercised within limits. Means these statements set out the definition of customary law for the right to use force in self-defense in anticipation. The Caroline incident is considered a guide to the right of self-defense in anticipation, and it also lays down very important aspect of use of force in self-defense, where it provides that the use of force must be proportionate to the necessity. There is a provision of proportionality. This case is of United States of America and Great Britain. It is considered as a guide for the justification of use of force in anticipation. I think if I quote an example from Indian history, it will give you a more pointed picture to understand what anticipatory self-defense stands for. The idea of anticipatory self-defense, I would say, is not new. In Indian history, we find King Kansa, Mama of Bhagwan Shri Krishna, who ruled over the land of Mathura, which is close to Aligarh, imprisoned his sister Devaki in anticipation to defend himself, because he was told that the eighth son of Devaki would be the one to kill him and end his rule. Terrified by this, he imprisoned Devaki and her husband and killed 7 of their sons. This is a case of anticipatory self-defense which we find in Indian history. The case of King Kansa. The use of force in anticipation also is pregnant with the question of preemptive self-defense. In customary law, states justify and unjustify the position of preemptiveness, that force can be used preemptively. The customary law whether allows the preemptive use of force by states or group of states without UNSC authorization is not clear. It may be permissible only if Article 51 of the UN Charter is not read literally, but expansively to preserve as lawful of the use of force in self-defense as traditionally allowed in customary law. The problem is whether a first strike could ever be considered defensive act rather than act of aggression. The right of anticipatory self-defense assumes that an aggression is about to strike and that one acts defensively in anticipation of the attack rather than waiting for the attack to take place. This use of force is authorized under assumption. Theoretically, it is possible that even a first strike could be considered defensive in nature and lawful if it was to forestall an attack that was imminent, that was going to happen. The law is unsettled. Even the customary law with regard to the position of preemptive self-defense is unsettled. Preemptive use of force is a doctrine whereby a state claims the right to launch an offensive on potential enemy whom one expects to grow so strong that the delay would cause defeat. Therefore, don't give chance to the enemy that carry out. Don't give the chance to the enemy to carry out the attack. That happened in case of Iraq in 2003 when United States of America preemptively used force against Iraq under the assumption, under the consideration that Iraq is building a nuclear weapon, and if it is not stopped right there, it might in near future, would be a quite grave threat for the United States of America, for the interest of the United States of America in West Asia. A number of states since 1945 have expressed support for a right of preemptive self-defense, either as a general premise and or to respond to a particular incident involving the use of force. However, this is not a general acceptance. The tradition of preemptive self-defense, though it became very popular in post-Cold War period, but we can trace the uses of preemptive self-defense in the history. And now I would bring here into discussion the very prominent incident of preemptive self-strike, self-defense, which happened in Greek. The tradition of preemptive self-defense is very old. The Peloponnesian War, very popular one, popular of the Greek history, is mother of all preventive wars. The Peloponnesians, led by Sparta, waged a war on Athens. Sparta waged a war on Athens because Athenians feared that in future, because the Sparta feared that in near future, Athens' growing power would break apart Sparta's alliance system. The dominance of Sparta, which it maintained through alliances. In post-United Nations era, the doctrine of preemptive use of force was advocated in 2002 as Bush Doctrine. This doctrine refers to the multiple interrelated foreign policy principles, including unilateralism, preemptive war, and regime change. Right from the very beginning, United States of America has been unilateralist and outwardly looking. So this position of United States of America was actually uh, incorporated into the doctrine of preemptive use of force. This doctrine has been broadly rejected by states. In 2016, the United States of America itself appeared to reaffirm the requirement of an imminent armed attack for the purposes of engaging a right anticipatory self-defense, thereby implicitly ruling out the right of preemptive self-defense. Beyond the USA position, whether with the exception of Israel, Israel has used this preemptive self-defense, anticipatory self-defense, and it has tried Iraq in 1882, the under construction nuclear plant of Iraq, and in various situations we see that Israel uses the preemptive use of force. So, leaving aside the Israel, states' practice in support is virtually non-existent. So the majority of the states do not go with this idea of preemptive self-defense. The non-aligned movement, it represented almost half of the world. It explicitly rejected the doctrine of preventive self-defense. India itself rejected it. India was the leader of the non-alignment movement. India being the leader of the non-alignment movement, it changed its position. The current position is different. It intervened. We know that India acted against Pakistan in 2019. Aerial strike at Balakot, India described as non-military and therefore do not attack the legal framework on the use of force on UN Charter provisions. They may be considered as law and order measures undertaken on the territory of another state. However, this position is unusual from the standpoint of customary law as well as from the treaty law. India described its use of force against Pakistan as non-military measure. Non-military measure. As a justification, law and order measures. It described this as a law and order measures, a non-military act. So the support that India has received for its right to self-defense after the Pulwama attack, the absence of any condemnation by other states as well as the United Nations suggests that the recognition of the right of self-defense against non-state actors. This right was used against the states, and this position was not speculated by the United Nations creators that how the use of force would be used in matters of non-state actors. So we see in the present times that there is greater use of preemptive strike, preemptive use of force in case of non-state actors. So, in contrast to almost uniform rejection of the preventive self-defense, whether states currently possess the right to respond to imminent armed attack occupies a much less clear position even in customary law. There is no agreement amongst as to whether UN Charter has interpreted whatever way a state justify states can justify that they possess such a right as a matter of pre-charter customary law that has survived the signing of the charter and by virtue of development that has taken place since 1945. How far the charter be interpreted as allowed to the use of force to restore or further the democracy, to restore order in a state without an effective government, to further the right of self-defense, to further the right of self-determination outside the decolonization context and to respond to the terrorist strike. How far United Nations Security Council shall exercise centralized control over these and other uses of force. This, in fact, is a question which is not clearly answered as of now by the states, either by the treaty law or in customary law. In summary, we can say at this stage that no more than state practice remains inconclusive. We can say that anticipatory self-defense, the practice of a state remains inconclusive in terms of establishing a clear position. Post-UN Charter claims to a right of preemptive self-defense are relatively uncommon and several states remain hostile to the idea of anticipatory self-defense. The fact is, recourse to this right is undoubtedly a feature of contemporary state practice. A limited number of states remain very pro to right of preemptive self-defense and continue to explicitly espouse it, most notably in the modern context of combating the persistent threat of international terrorism in matters of non-state actors and various other issues interlinked with it, various other conflicts which happens within the states. More and more conflicts among the states have become less and less, and because of this change, because of the nature of the threats has changed, so the customary law and the treaty law both remain inconclusive in matters of laying down the clear guidelines to address the issue. The ICJ has pointed out that the United Nations Charter is not a fixed document. It is not a static one, and with in future, there is chances are that it might address these questions to create the guidance for regulating use of force in relations among the states. For today, I end here. Thank you.